All right, we're good, Chief.
Everyone on? Okay, great. I guess.
I saw someone wave their hand.
I'm not hearing any sound.
I don't hear them either.
Can you hear
us? Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
We can hear you.
Great, now I hear you. All right, welcome everyone to the 12th AsktheChief Forum, the West Coast edition. We're going to start out, as I've been starting out in the last 3 months, giving everyone a bump up in their energy and containment afterwards. So right now, everyone, hands approximately 12 inches apart. All right. And you should start to feel the energy between your hands and or fingers. Anyone not feeling it, let me know. Okay. Now I'm going to increase the vibration. I'm going to bump it up. And you should start to feel that vibration rise in your hands. Okay. Anyone not feeling it, let me know. Okay, terrific. Now we're going to take that energy and we're going to create our containment. Okay, containing, protect, containing your environment, containing the forum, containing the room, starting now, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and now this one, I'm going to use just clear our space. As such, okay. So today's subject will be the movie Black Panther, but I wanted to give anyone a chance to ask any just general questions having to do with Neo Shamanism. And if there are no questions, then we'll just go ahead and start with the review on the Black Panther. Okay. So we're going to start with anyone wanting to share any opinions that they had about the movie. Feel free to speak up.
Oh, I'll share. I just wanted to share just a couple of things that I noticed.
The sound is a little funny.
Oh, sorry.
It's is just it a little quiet, but I can hear him.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. One of the things I noticed, I remember you talking about how density really loves war because throughout war it can suck up a lot of essence. So I thought it was interesting that when the movie first started and they're talking about Wakanda and how the tribes came together, one of the first things you see is all the 4 tribes couldn't get along. It's just a nonstop war. So I thought it was interesting how they started the movie off with that. And then another thing was the vibranium thing. It kind of reminded me of how when there's like a resource that countries may need, it causes people to fight for it. So I thought that was another interesting thing that came up. But yeah, that's all I wanted to share. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. That was really good. Yeah, I didn't know if anyone was going to actually start out and actually notice that, you know, in the beginning it's just really odd that these guys couldn't get along with one another. To me, that's very, you know, yin and yin, you know. So again, they're starting with, again, this is a comic book, fantasy story. Vibranium isn't real, but even if it was real, these guys are fighting over it. It's funny because the name vibranium reminds me of the movie Avatar, with the big blue people, and they had this mineral called unobtainium. And when I first heard it, I said, "Man, this has got to be a joke." But the reality of the matter is that it doesn't exist either. So they create these types of of minerals or whatever, these rare whatever it is to that people basically in the end end up fighting over. Again, what was the other than the fact that they were battling, which again, if this was based on anything that I would consider to be real, having to do with individuals from Series B, that realm, there wouldn't be any fighting, period. And it's almost as though they were saying that these guys were, I don't know, was it like they're the first cultures on the planet or something, or in Africa or something like that.
Yeah, at least an early culture, and if it was that early, then it wouldn't have been during the time of density. So it doesn't make sense that they'd be warring, because war is only a part of this realm.
Yeah, literally, it's a Univian tool, just as Eric had mentioned, that generates essence. Something feeds off of that type of behavior. And only if you're programmed into thinking that it's normal do you think it's something that's normal. Or as a kid coming up and being told when I was in elementary school that, you have to have, war, have peace, and all this other really kind of ass-accurate types of stuff. So, let's see, what were we?
Okay, so then now we can just jump into some questions, or we can jump into the sequence of the movie. It's up to you, Chief.
Well, I mean, if anyone else has anything else to add to that, to what Eric has contributed, feel free. Or we'll just, I guess we can go into, I'm trying to figure out whether to just get into the movie and kind of like, depending on where we are in the movie, yeah, we can, in other words, address questions that have to do with certain certain segments of the movie, certain scenes. So let's go ahead and get started then.
So if anyone, those of you who submitted questions, thank you. So we're going to go through the sequence of the movie. And if you feel like the topic we're talking about has to do with the question that you asked, feel free to just jump in there and be like, that's my question. And I'll look for the questions that you submitted, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Okay, great. So we'll start.
Yeah, we've been up again late.
So since 4 in the morning.
Yeah, working on this. So yeah, we're starting out a little slow.
Okay.
It'll pick up in a few minutes anyway.
So, Chief, there's some broad topics that are issues that are represented in the movie, or we can go through the sequence as well.
Okay. So in broad topics.
Okay. So some of the broader topics are they have to do with, for one, just a background on the movie Black Panther and what its original form was. It's a comic book.
Yeah, the comic book that came out in 1966.
Yes, in the comic called Fantastic Four #52.
Okay. So he was in other words, a character that was that was introduced because at the time, I'm trying to remember exactly if he was the first considered Black or whatever they call African American comic book hero introduced through Marvel comic books. And for the obvious reasons back then, more sales if you can get a broader sector of the community, of the population to purchase your product.
Yes, Black Panther.
Yeah. So I remember it was pretty cool. Asian myself, but I was a kid when it came on. When it was released, and I have to admit, I thought it was pretty cool. The guy was very well drawn and so on, and I think my excitement then, and if you can say like that, was overly excited. I just was really pretty, pleased because I was into comic books at the time. So I understand the enthusiasm around the movie Black Panther because man, there was so much talk about it, and a lot of folks were very, very excited about it. Just primarily because, again, not seeing, I should say, the sheer numbers of people of color who really, looking really good, photographed really, really nicely. No one with a really embarrassing character. So it was also entertaining. And just keeping in mind, as I kept in mind when I was a kid, I'm reading a comic book. This stuff is imaginary. It's from someone else's imagination. And the same with the story from the movie. It's like two screenwriters who happen to be black male. The interesting thing about it was that I believe there was about maybe 7 to 9 producers, and who were all white, and except for one guy who was South Korean. So all the producers were white, and the money people were white. So even when the writers and the directors were basically working on the movie, and I've had some experience, in the movie industry, years ago, that there are other people that make decisions as to what gets on the movie, what's taken off the movie, or which direction the story goes in. So I personally feel and see that there were some places where they just basically kind of pulled it in a little bit, rather than go full hog like maybe a Superman movie or one of the other DC or Marvel comic strip movies, where the superhero just seems like it can go a little bit further. But with that, I'm not going to complain about it. I thought it was actually, for what it was, was entertaining and well done.
Mm-hmm.
So,
starting out, we've already talked about vibranium isn't real, but the way they treat it in the movie is a lot like a fetish. It is like the power of their country and the power of everything they use, and it's a part of their culture that makes them feel confident in their country and all those things.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the main topics of this whole movie, if you look at it, is destabilization of a community and the efforts to do so.
Yeah, I guess in the debate in the movie on whether to open up to the world or just keep themselves secluded, and they weren't totally secluded because obviously these guys, some of those the members, were basically in regular society, primarily in America, so they weren't totally isolated. But it was kind of interesting that the individuals the characters who did spend time away from the country of Wakanda, their characters definitely seemed like they were affected by almost like the toxicity of being out in the broader world.
Yeah, you could tell that they changed a lot because of their interests became a lot different. For example, there was a character. She's the general of the army of Wakanda. She wears a red outfit and she has a spear. And when they go into one of the clubs to do a fight scene, she's wearing a wig, and she finds it annoying and unnecessary in combat and a lot of other reasons. But the woman who's named Nakia, she had been in the rest of the world as a spy for a while, so she thinks it looks pretty. She thinks it's normal, and it seems like there's a bit more of a pride in being Wakandian versus kind of assimilating with the rest of the perspective of Black people.
Yeah. Well, one of the things That's out of my head for a moment. Excuse me. Well, that was one of the things also that they were doing that was pretty cool. It's kind of, I would say, earlier on when it started to, in the States started to introduce, more diversity in media and so on and so forth. It was kind of to appease the voices that were, of dissent, who were just basically talking about, you know, no free balance, no balance in the media. That literally, as a kid, that was all, you had to watch those three channels and one channel that was, I think, might have been a weekend channel or something like that. And so everything that we were exposed to was straight up, mostly white programming. And a lot of times, if there was what considered to be black programming, there were its fair share of buffoonery. There were a few guys who were considered, I guess, stars who didn't necessarily do a lot of embarrassing acting. One was Sidney Poitier. When I was given first came out, his name was Sidney Porter, so he decided to put a flair on it somewhere along in his community, in his career. And there was another guy, Harry Belafonte, who did a few movies, but he was an entertainer who was in the movies. And another guy, a couple other guys. One was this guy named Woody Strode, and his characters usually would die kind of early in the movies, which was, a running joke with black folks back then, that if a black person was in a movie with a lot of white people, that person's going to be the first one to die. There was the performer Sammy Davis Jr., who was also, singer and dancer, who was in movies as well during that time. But again, the pridefulness or whatever was really lacking. It was literally like, black folks as a footnote or something like that, as well as Asians were, very much minimized as well in their presence in film. And to some extent, people with Latino backgrounds were also minimized as far as like their roles. So anyway, all that has what you were saying about a certain type of pride, I believe you're saying, as far as like.
I think the word confidence would be better because pride entails a lot of weird things. So maybe like a confidence in their expression. It just seems like the Wakandian, example is more balanced than just assimilating to the rest of the world and its chaos.
Well, yeah, an acceptance of one's genetics, literally. I forgot what you said the name of the guard, the woman who's with the short hair cut and the sphere. Yeah, I think what's it, Lakoya?
Okay.
Lakoya.
That's hard to say. I don't want to screw
it up. Anyway, no, you get the gist of it. Yeah, because there's a scene when they're fighting in that club, where she finally gets a chance to whip that wig off her head and just throws it on the floor.
She just throws that guy in the face.
She throws it in the face.
She says a weapon. She's like, same thing.
Yeah.
She stabs herself.
Which was something, I have to, admit, for decades, I had some issues around concepts that, black folks had about their own features and the hair and so on. And I just always thought it was like the most ridiculous thing from the time I was a kid. And it was, when they showed that, I said, well, somebody's been doing their homework. Because this whole self-hate, issue having to do with how one looks, obviously doesn't come from the culture itself. It's something that's been laid upon the culture. So I felt that there were parts that the director, the writers wanted to get across that had to do with feeling, as you say, confident about oneself and feeling good about oneself. Wakanda, extremely modern, more modern than any other, country or whatever on the planet. Pretty cool, idea. I didn't see anything wrong with that, except, a lot of, like what Eric mentioned, has a very yin style to it. It's, very Western in their attitudes about just their existence. So in the end, I couldn't say that it was even though the country is in Africa and they're doing very cool African accents and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
I still felt that there was, quite a bit of what I call the West and European type of scenarios going on and mindsets going on. But again, they did tackle certain things in a very interesting way.
So the next thing that they talk about, that like Eric talked about, the first right off the bat, we're like 5 tribes live in constant war. Oh, okay, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And then sometimes it feels like they, they never want to show you an example that is like the rest of the universe, where consciousness can get along with other consciousness without a problem. There's always got to be a problem.
Yeah, well, again, these are concepts that aren't really readily introduced into society or even talked about in any length. When they talk about futuristic or universal here, they tend to leave out the real concept having to do with other expressions in the universe. And not to say that they don't, you have to watch, I don't know, like UFO hunters or ancient aliens or something like that to get a conversation that may talk about things or other beings and so on and so forth and their possible influence on this world today. Those approaches are always very, very, I just say most of the time off base. Some of the stuff's very interesting, things that they can't explain why certain things are on the planet and why they exist and who put them there and so on and so forth. But you take that from there.
In media, as you can see, they're always talking. They always show examples of things that are examples of like stress or war or things like this. And people say, well, that's just how it is. They've even done like, when I was in college, they talked about this news channel that decided that they would do only positive news, because most news that I'm familiar with is always constant negativity. And they went out of business, and they say, oh, because the public just didn't want to hear only good news. That's not true, because the reason it went out of business is it didn't provide enough essence to yin and yang.
Yeah, it reminds me of the scene from The Matrix, where the Smiths have not Neo, but Morpheus. They capture Morpheus and they're torturing him to break him so they can get the secrets to where Zion is. And the Smith, he's talking about, they created this paradise for the human consciousness, but they lost, many of them like crops or whatever, because the human doesn't like just having a peaceful existence. They have to have strife. And again, that's, that was a corkscrew, sponsored by, Yin of Yin, really, to try to, try to convince you that all of this discomfort that you feel, there's no way around it. In other words, it comes with the package of being in this world primarily, because they don't even talk about the universe even in in that movie as well.
Yeah. That's a great note for the next thing, because whenever it says that they lived in constant war until a warrior shaman came and they made him, the leader, but they called him king in this movie because it's a very Western concept, and Disney is all about kings and princes and things.
Yeah, I mean, you can use a word, excuse me, sorry, use a word having to do with, I guess, hierarchy. And yeah, kings and queens, that definitely reminds me of King Arthur's court or something. And normally when referring to someone who's head of a community, they tend to usually, use something that's akin to leader or chief or something like that. Also, the use of the word tribe. I've had some issues with that for many decades because I felt that it was a minimization of certain groups on the planet by calling them tribes. Especially if they're non-European, they're considered tribes. Some might say, well, they don't see the problem with it, but I just, as I just said, that it always sensed that it was a lowering of the status or the stature of whatever culture that was being spoken about, and only certain cultures are referred to as tribes. And these were cultures who were usually closer to nature, closer to Gaia. Mm-hmm. So that was something that always stands out. It's just a personal little pet peeve of mine, where I just feel that just the use of that word it minimizes. It's like we refer to Africans as tribal, nations people, and some call Indians as tribal or whatever. And some decades ago, nations people started saying we're a nation. So if you're going to approach them correctly, you will approach them as what is your nation? That what nation do you belong to, or that you grow up in, and so on, which I thought was more respectful. Anyway.
Thank you for sharing that. The next thing that's on the list is about the fact that they say that a warrior shaman was chosen, but then as you go along, you see that the leaders are not very shaman. They're like warrior shaman light.
Yeah, really shaman light. Yeah, because you start to forget that Black Panther is supposed to be a shaman.
Yeah.
And the only thing that seemed to maybe seem like shamanistic was the ritual that he went through where they bury him, and then he goes into the ancestral plane, and and then has his chat with his father. And those glowing plants or whatever that they were using to
heart-shaped herbs.
Yeah. So
there's a question that goes on.
Sure.
Okay. So there is a question submitted that has to do with the ancestral plane, and it says, is the ancestral plane similar to the astral plane?
And yeah, as far as this, again, that the whole story is basically fantasy, loosely based on something. Yeah, you would say that it is basically the same, even within those those planes, those astral planes. There are like levels even there, which there are certain things that exist that aren't aware of other things that exist. Usually if you get higher up as far as like the dimensions on those planes, the higher up you are, the more you see. So if you're in the fifth dimension, you see everything from the fifth all the way down to to dimension one. And I consider this realm, this what I call hologram, as dimension one. So with that said, yeah, they are talking about literally the other dimension and the reality of it, which it is real, and they show it in the movie because the cultures that are still closer to their indigenous roots are very much aware that these realms do exist. And a lot of the times when there are rites of passage for young men, they inevitably have to experience that realm at points throughout their rites of passage. So it is real, and they're basically referring to the same thing, but again, within the astral plane, there are still various levels. Okay.
You've shared with us and shared with myself that density can survive in dimension 1 through 5, but anything 6 and higher, the vibration is so high, so intense, because that's how the universe vibration actually should be. It should not be as low as dimension 1 like it is here. So density has, if you're seeing these ancestors, they've had a human expression. They've been damaged. So they could never exist in a higher dimension that too high, 6 up and up. They would disintegrate. And so these ancestors, these people in this fictitious example would not know for sure if they were really their ancestors. Any entity could pose as their ancestor.
Yeah, well, yeah. In other words, it's kind of trains a person who may be, even if you're someone who experiences out of body, in other words, astral travel. You are, once you come out of this avatar, you are in another dimension. So you could be in, the astral plane, or you can even end up walking around in what those on the other side consider the real, in the real. So again, anyone who's ever experienced, which I've had numerous of those experiences from the time I was a kid, you are there, you know that there's another dimension, out there because you've experienced it. And if it hasn't driven, have people trying to drive you crazy if you, tell them about it, you're pretty much sane. I consider myself to be pretty sane, and I experience those things, and there's no reason for me to not believe what I personally experienced. So all that, again, just to add to the reality of the astral, what they call the astral plane, as a reality. But there seemed like there was something else that was I wanted to add to that, having to do with something that you mentioned, but it's kind of slipping my mind right now.
Well, another thing is that these people of, the fake country of Wakanda, if they are focusing on their ancestors and depending on them, they're not allowing that consciousness to move on.
Yeah, in the Neo Shamanic, point of view, yeah, it's not.
It's a bit
they're kind of like, well, hopefully, if it was real, they wouldn't be just hanging around that tree all, for eternity.
As panthers or people.
Yeah, I guess the, changing things up would be turning from a person into a panther or something. But again, that's literally how a lot in this realm likes to express concepts of spirituality or mysticism or astral plane and what's there and so on and so forth. And it wasn't that original in the sense that he goes to that astral plane, he talks to the Father, and I don't know if I would say he got a lot of information other than he just said it's really hard for a nice person to lead a nation.
To surround yourself with people that you trust. And when you talk to the chief, the savvy approach is not about trusting people, not about trusting anyone, even if they're your family or your friends or whatever. It's about observing them, because observing gives you a more of a balanced approach. Because if there's somebody that's close to you and you just trust them and they do something really weird because they get hacked or whatever other reason, then you're off balance. But if you were just observing them in general, you would be able to see, okay, today they're acting a little weird. I'm going to change my approach because they're changing their approach as well. So,
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, I mean, you taught me that, so I.
Yeah. Well, yeah. When you brought that up, then my mind went from where it was into that topic. But you can go ahead because I'm going to. Well, no, you didn't really, because usually when I'm trying to stabilize in the morning here, my mind is going on all these different places at the same time. So I'll start on one topic, and then you'll hit like an intersection. Oh, that's an interesting segue from this. When initially I was planning on going straight. So that's really what happens.
Well, that's what makes AsktheChief so great, because you can go in all different directions.
Yeah. Well, again, I do feel like I'm being kind of fiddled with it right now, because the thought comes up and then I get ready to talk about it, and then it goes.
Okay, well, I'll just continue and I'm sure it'll come back. So, yes.
See, it was almost there. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. So next we're going on to the deities that they worship.
Okay, so when we were looking up one of the deities, the one with the having to do with the Panthers, we did find that we couldn't find anything actually on the real deal except, well, they set it in some cat
Well, if you're
deity or
interested
something
in
like that.
talking about that, or we can go to the other deity.
Well, the one that stood out the most for you, which was the one that I think it's the gorilla,
Great Gorilla.
Great Gorilla, his crew.
Yes.
Yeah, and their belief, their deity was actually Hindu. When we did a research on the name, and you can just basically
Sure,
go.
sure.
Yeah.
So, interesting enough, there is information on, let me see, information on that we found on the internet. When we looked up for they call it Basti, is the Panther goddess. And there's a lot of there's a really cool story around Sekhmet that is the real story. When you look online, she's always portrayed as a demon or like, quite, menacing or evil. And
Yeah, she's a Egyptian. Well, I would say she's an Egyptian pharaoh, and what my understanding, and when I, dive into more information on this person, on this character, that was someone who actually did exist. So I said, well, she has a face like a lioness. I've never seen a person with a face like a lioness, but people hadn't seen a whole lot of things on this planet until someone decided from Europe that they're going to travel to south to Africa, and then find out that there are things like giraffes and rhinoceros and and certain other types of creatures that don't exist up north. So, but as they were saying is that it was interesting when we were doing the research on it that Sekhmet came up because he's been coming up off and on for a good couple of months now in some of our research. And she, some of the definitions talk about her being a warrior, which that part, yeah, I definitely got some confirmations about that. But again, it was a little scattered as far as like whether they felt that it was actually Sekhmet who was the character that they're talking about.
Yeah, so when they tried to villainize the Egyptian goddess Sekhmet, then they decided to make a little sister that wasn't evil, and she's okay, and that's what the Panther goddess in Wakanda is based off of. The fictitious, cool little sister who's gentle and kind. But they try to pigeon you into consciousness is only one way. If they are good in battle, then they're evil.
Well, again, if they're good in battle against you, then they're evil.
Yeah, against you.
So obviously, again, the old logic of how things are presented in this realm, there are a few people who will actually talk about, well, if this person is fighting against invaders, then they would be considered, I don't like to use the word that much because they like to throw it around a lot, hero, but be a hero to that particular culture or of their culture or their side. So if the opposing forces come in and they overrun or say defeat, finally defeat the person, which did happen with Sekhmet, then they basically villainize her because she was such a formidable warrior. And she caused them so much trouble when they were doing the transition. Well, now, one of the things that kept going and coming had to do with the, if you're really looking at Black Panther as something that was maybe possibly real, that means that culture started post-invasion or post-European invasion of Gaia. So whenever there's war, that's always after density arrived on the planet, after Europeans showed up. Then he brings this whole concept, that it's just normal. Well, these, 5 nations, and they just fought with each other, and they just fought and fought and fought and fought. And no one thinks that, is it, is it necessary for these guys to be fighting over things? Certain research that I've done over the years having to do with certain cultures in Africa, and of course, there's a lot of countries on that continent. But are stories of certain cultures who had a certain way of dealing with disputes where it wasn't this, all-out war. And one culture said that they would, before they even would start with whatever their contest over, a dispute, maybe resources or something, that being overused maybe by one group or something, they always figured out what was going to be the end result after whichever side won the dispute, so that there wouldn't be any, prolonged, aggression or sour feelings, because they agreed on something before they even go into battle over it. And battles were definitely, as far as what I do understand, had nothing to do with, like one mass of warriors and another mass of warriors going toe to toe. A lot of times it was a contest between, the two strongest of each community, and that's how they would settle disputes.
And when we were doing muscle testing and through sessions and all the research that you've done, we found that whenever before Gaia was contaminated, there was no need to settle disputes through battle. It's more about expression, There's all different types of expression. We're familiar with dancing or, music as expressions here, but there's so many more different types of expression in the universe that she talks about: expand, express, explore, and experience. All those things, that's what the universe is about, not about war or fighting. And here in this movie, they talk about ritual combat. When light beings had to war, it wasn't because they wanted to. It's not about raping, killing, and pillaging, which is how war is depicted in the West. It was about putting something back into balance, because they don't even consider fighting density a battle. They consider it bringing Gaia back into balance, bringing this realm back into balance, and deleting the whole expression of yin and yang because it's out of balance.
Well, the whole concept of warring having to do with the Supreme Consciousness Universe point of view, approach, that the universe is likened, and I might have said it on the forum or two, maybe not, that the whole universe is considered like your body, your avatar. So the whole idea of doing things that would compromise your expression, your avatar, by doing very unhealthy things, or just the whole idea of one part of my body having issue with another part of my body. It's like my right hand having issue with my left hand. It just makes no logical sense. But being introduced into this realm and growing up in it, where everything that's being told to you is supporting this illogic. That it's natural to, really what they're saying, it's natural to gnaw off your own arm, because, either you're crazy, you're looking at it and, why would I have issue, with my own body, my own being? Why would I have issues? Like, why would the heart ask the lungs to pay money to beat because the body needs the heart, to keep going? And that's what it's akin to in this world. Is and there are cultures that talk about a lot of nations people's stories that I read when I was younger. They would always refer to other cultures as brothers and sisters. So regardless as to whether they were nations people, African or European, they would always refer to these consciousness as brothers and sisters. And that was literally, has to do with that type of information actually existing, well, at the time still existing, and being able to make its way still over in certain cultures that had to do with the reality of the universe is about. That everyone is related due to the fact that they come from the same source. But something comes, comes along. Before I get there, I think we're probably getting to the point where we're talking about destabilization. So I'm going to stop it there, and we can just pick up later.
So we wrote down just a few ways that density uses to destabilize communities that have any semblance of balance, because there is no country in this realm that has this type of balance that was when Gaia, originally was. So excuse me. So we wrote down that the ways to destabilize a community. If you recall watching Jumanji 2, or whichever one it was, they talk about this community, this community that was dependent on a stone, and this stone was their luck, and this stone, made their crops grow, and this stone made, a lot of other things for that community work well. And then the stone was taken away, and the whole community went into poverty, and their crops didn't grow, and it was just like chaos. And people think that that's kind of normal, but that actually density is the one that would introduce the belief of believing in this stone,
which is a fetish.
Which is a fetish, because you give your energy to the fetish. That's what Chief has taught in several of the forums, and even in the book talks about fetishes, My Neo Shamanic Journey. And this stone was then introduced. The concept of believing in it is density, and then density taking it away. That's their way of destabilizing the community, and it was their idea in the first place.
Yeah, in other words, they basically teach these guys to believe in this external thing as being a power source, when in reality, you as a consciousness is a power source, as well. Just went into two different directions. With the destabilization, well, I wanted to just also mention that, since we're talking about the Black Panther, that the one guy, the cousin whose father was killed by the king, they were brothers. They really do talk a lot about how he was damaged by his time living in the West, living outside of Wakanda. So I just wanted to say that they did really talk about the damage coming from the outside world.
Yes. So, for example, another damage that comes from the outside world is the concept of religion. Before things were contaminated, there was no concept of religion, because religion is putting your energy into an external item. Just as we talked about in a fetish, you're putting your energy into an external being. If that being had energy of its own, it wouldn't need yours.
Okay.
And so that's when we're still talking about religion. So density introduces religion into communities, because these entities they don't have energy, because they are imbalanced and they are part of the yin and yang density. So that's why they feed. When Chief says that you are a battery, that's why people become what Chief calls black ooze, because their energy is drained to the point where they have nothing left. Did you want to also tell something?
Yeah, in a few, but I really needed to stand up.
Okay, no
getting
problem.
something just blocking my flow.
Okay.
So
Also another dense entity way to destabilize a community is to have them dependent on ancestors, because ancestors are something that dense entities can just act like the ancestor and lead that community into chaos, into imbalance. And then fourthly, all these are huge topics, but fourthly, kidnapping the children of that community and then poisoning them with a certain mindset, whether it's religion or other things, which you saw with the war dogs. Everyone that went out, and like Chief says, they got poisoned, they got assimilated. You will assimilate, you will become part of the board. It's just like that. And that's what happens in a lot of communities all over throughout history. They were destabilized through these means.
yeah, so we talked about plants before. We haven't mentioned it yet, that there are individuals that are planted into certain communities. Again, there's not going to be just broad information out there, because again, this realm is not interested in balance anyhow. So, but even with the young man who Killmonger, when he comes back, or I mean, for the first time, I guess, to Wakanda, he comes in with all of this damage and presents himself as, he beats beats Black Panther. He's extremely vicious and just, kind of like a heartless guy. But also, I felt that they were trying to confuse things a bit because here he is, he's talking about he's doing these things for his people. But if you really look at it closely, he's basically coming in and planning to be a dictator. It's more like a Pinky in the Brain type of deal, where he wants to control the whole planet, which, again, it's this megalomaniac nonsense that is very, very, very unrealistic and sick. So some had some concerns about whether they should like this character or not, because he talks about doing this for people who have, Black folks who have less and so on and so forth. Nice rhetoric, but if you watch and see what he's doing, as soon as he got in there, he wanted them to, I think it was to burn those the herbs. And when the one elder woman protests, he smacks her and tells her, "You do what I tell you to do." So is this guy really someone who's for the people, or is he there for himself? And that's basically the selfishness of the West. It's all about me. But if I could walk up and I give you a nice story about, it's all for the children, it's all for those who have little, and so on and so forth. You'll have individuals who've been programmed into believing this nonsense instead of actually observing what this guy is about, or even feeling the fact that this guy might feel funky, his energy might feel funky. So, that part, as far as I would say, holds against the fantasy. So I can only, really get in stuff so much and blame it for being, wrong. It's a fantasy movie. But again, this guy, they give mixed messages. They've had some of the rhetoric.
I have an example where we wrote down the conversation of people. So if you're looking for movies in a Neo Shamanic perspective, look at the conversations that the characters will have, and you'll be able to, as you rewatch the forums or as you read the book and books to come, you'll be able to see through the conversation that's a lot of where they add the corkscrews, the confusion. And be for sure that there will be no consistent characters, usually. They'll say one thing that's really cool, and they'll say one thing that's really effed up in the next sentence. Because that's the end again. It's all about chaos is right, up is down, backwards is forward, all of those kinds of things. And here, so Black Panther, in the end, when he does his final fight with Killmonger, he says, "You want to see us become just like the people you hate so much, divide and conquer the land as they did." And Killmonger, he says the same thing all the time, each time to everyone. "I learned from my enemies. I'll beat them at their own game." But Chief was saying, how can you beat them at their own game when they created that dense game and have played it longer than he has ever played it? And then Black Panther says, "You become them," which is true. He had become like the density he hated so much. He says, "I understand colonizers. I'll use their strategies against them." And when he says that, it's like, you're saying killing, raping, and pillaging is okay, because then in the next sentence he says, "We'll arm repressed people all over the world," and that means, and to kill anyone who gets in the way, their children, anyone who's in power. The sun will never set on the Wakanda Empire. He had become them.
Yeah, well, in the sun never sets. That so a lot of folks may know in history had to do with when the British were all over the planet and colonizing all over the place. So they used to say that the sun never sets on the British Empire. So they're using this very obvious scenario to literally basically throwing shade at the West, which rightfully so. I mean, if anyone knows anything about history, yeah, they did run around it, and they did undermine a lot of cultures. while they were serving, yin yin. But again,
I'll just, I can continue.
but I wanted to also, when you were talking about examples, I thought you were going to talk about the guy who, the woman, the security woman with the spear, her husband, and they had the conversation about taking in refugees or something like that. And
well, we were talking about Killmonger first, so if I want me to finish that example, then
well,
I can
as
go
far
on
as
to that.
Killmonger, okay, we'll go there first, and then we'll come back. But I just wanted to remember to come back.
Right, I will.
Yeah.
No problem. So Black Panther is right. He says you have become them because that's how density is. It affects things and it poisons things, like Chief teaches, and it brought down his vibration if it wasn't already low, because the levels of ferocity and just the way he kills and the way he thinks is someone who was very dense to begin with. So she says, you have become them, you will destroy the world, Wakanda included. And then Killmonger says, the world took everything away from me, everything I ever loved. I'll make sure we're even. Again, vengeance is a Western concept, is a dense entity concept.
Yeah, but the whole concept of everything from him, I was kind of joking and said, well, the only thing you would say that he could say was taken from him would be his father. So I'm not sure what else he was talking about having to do with everything was taken from him. They didn't really, it was his father. What else? What else was taken from you? But again, they're showing a certain level of, insanity in this character, where, even in real life, there's times you get in an argument with somebody, and they'll just come out and tell you that, you always do this, this thing when perhaps you may have done that thing once. But you always, and it just seemed like, his character was crazy. So, I mean, the actor was really good. He did play, that role, very, very well.
Yeah.
And again, yeah, he had the rhetoric about community and so on and so forth. But as I look at things from the Neo Shamanic point of view, I always just look at the energy I observe. I feel energy. These are actors, so I'm not going to feel energy, but I'm paying attention to the script and what's being said.
So, because in the next sentence he says, I'll track down anyone who would even think about being loyal to you. I'll put their ass in the dirt next to your sister. And if he cared about Wakanda, because he was, in the last time he said, the Wakandian Empire will, the sun will never set on it. If he was really so into Wakanda, it's more so I'm really so into myself. Mm-hmm. I'm really so into world domination. And that's why Black Panther says you have become them.
Yeah, yeah. So it was like he had become just, literally westernized. But again, aspects of how, well, I mean, there were some, definitely Western influences. There's concept or talks of the sister who's into, I guess she's invents things and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. And they get into, compounds and alloys and all this other, very egghead type of thinking, which is just saying that this is the way that you think and how you invent things, which is very much from another culture's point of view. So there are, if you understand the concept of energy and what these realms are about, there are a lot of different ways to, to accomplish things or to create things. Someone was asking about one of the machines that had to do with fixing the British guy's back, I believe.
Yeah.
He had a back injury. And someone was wondering whether, that was something that would be real or doable. And again, having to do with that alloy, that isn't real again. But it's still not looking at, if you really wanted to open your mind into the possibilities of anything and whatever can be created in this realm or in the universe, yes, something like that can be created. But would there be a society that would have this type of violence going on where someone would get injured that way? I could say, well, someone could be doing something else, fall out of a tree and then hurt themselves or whatever. But again, if you understand what it means to manipulate energy and matter, then a person can actually even heal themselves, or someone would just basically use their control and their influence over matter and energy to actually heal a person. Now, I've done adjustments on people from here in Asia and the United States, having to do with people who have scoliosis, and literally requesting that the body realigns itself. And in most cases, they actually work out. Sometimes someone's really stuck, they get some looseness there, but depending on where their mind is, sometimes they'll go back because of something that they're doing. But the reality of the matter is that I have manipulated, the alignment of people's bodies and those who experience me working on their energy. Yeah, this is beyond this realm, and I think I'm not sure if I should answer the question having to do with the difference between shamanism and Neo Shamanism. Was that a question that had to do with this, or was it something for a past one?
It was the
next
past
one.
one.
Okay.
It was the past one, but there's definitely a shaman-like issue in this movie. But there are a little bit more things that would you like to add to what you were talking about? I have here, a Rolodex of things you shared with me.
Yeah, for sure. But anyway, no, I can't remember half of it.
So,
But go ahead, though. You can go ahead.
Okay, I'll just share what you shared with me. Okay, so Chief was talking about, for one, as you know, in the outer universe, there is no such thing as, shooting other consciousness, which is what that character had a problem with. He got shot in the back. And technology in the outer universe is so much more advanced than here, because when Yinabian took over, he had to steal technology from other consciousness that he took over their planets and destroyed them. So he's always having old tech, old tech, old tech. And so even the tech you see in this realm is nothing compared to the outer universe. And so everything, if in the outer universe, it's about freedom of expand, express, explore, and experience, right? So if in this realm, it's about all about limitations. So if you're thinking about limitations, then that's how this realm gets so locked down. And when Chief was saying, controlling or influencing matter, it's about you and your body are in agreement with one another.
Yeah. So anyway, even there, I like what's being said, but I somehow I just feel like maybe from there we go back into something else.
Okay.
Yeah. Around the movie. So we were talking about. Oh, okay. Then we'll go back now to something I started having to do with and I guess we didn't really address it, having to do with the one they were talking about whether to open up their borders. And there's all this, this strife and so on and so forth going on in the outside world. The view of the outside world was just everybody's just in chaos. Almost like everyone out there is nuts, literally. And doesn't really go into why certain things are the way that they are outside of Wakanda. So there was a point where I believe it was the husband of this what's called the spear woman, the guy who raised the rhinoceros, and I believe that was him, right? They were talking about opening the doors to refugees. And Wakanda, of course, is this really cool, very balanced place for the most part, except for the warring between the clans. He literally was saying that I think it'd be a good idea to keep the doors closed, and also these people that they're talking about helping said they're going to bring their problems with them, which means that it's like they're going to come in and infect their realm with, in other words, their toxicity and their learned behavior from the outside, which in turn would basically destabilize, their country. And I'm not remembering exactly who was the person who was touting. I know one was the princess, who's the love interest Black Panther, who was talking about opening the doors and sharing and all of this.
Mainly her.
It was mainly her, which was extremely illogical. It was very, pie in the sky. But the guys who were basically talking about and keeping the doors closed, to me that made more sense to me. This whole concept of compassion in the way where you basically sacrifice yourself through your compassion, getting involved in something that's very, very toxic because some religious doctrine or something says to open your doors to whatever or whoever. If any of I think there's some religious things about any of God's children and so on and so forth. You're supposed to go out and help them and save them, which is not the way that the world operates anyway.
Well, it says, "Go ye and make disciples of all men." It's not as caring. It doesn't have as much caring. It's more so like
brainwashing,
bringing them into the church. Yeah.
Okay, so that one. Well, okay, so that basically is talking about going out and just basically brainwashing individuals, convincing them that the way that I see it or someone else sees it is the only way to approach or to think.
Would you like to go in the direction of religion, because they do talk about Christianity in a roundabout, in a secret way in this movie, but they also talk about, do you want to talk about more about sabotaging Wakanda and how the different concepts have been used?
Well, they did use some strategies that the West has used over centuries to destabilize. So, yeah.
Okay.
But I think, what was the first thing we were talking about?
So we can either go in the direction of religion, which we didn't get to cover,
which had to do,
or we can go in the direction of the people who are being used to destabilize.
Okay, so we can actually start with, because we did start on the religion thing and didn't really finish it up. But you were telling me that the Hindu faith that the king gorilla, whatever the guy's
yes,
name.
Google told us.
Yeah, Google said that it's basically a Hindu deity. But then they said that from reading the description of what that particular deity was about, it seemed to be very Christian.
Very.
Yeah.
I can read it if you like me to.
Sure, go ahead.
So the mountain tribe worshipped a different deity than the rest of who worshipped the Panther goddess. They worshipped Hanuman, and in the movie he was depicted as like a gorilla deity. But if you look up the name, it's a Hindu god, son of the wind god Vayu, god of wisdom, strength, courage, devotion, and self-discipline. That sounds fine and dandy, but Hanuman. But then later, if you keep researching, if you're looking at something, don't just look at one example and take it, for the truth. Look at other examples and then see what you get. So we kept doing that, and it says there was another example, and it says Hanuman tears his chest open to show that Sita Rama is in his heart, and that's very much Christianity, because it's always about you need to ask Jesus in your heart. You need to ask Jesus in your heart. All those things. Open your heart up. And then it says, Lord Hanuman symbolically stands for pure devotion, complete surrender, absence of ego or the lower self. His character tells us what we can do in our lives by becoming pure devotees of God, aligning ourselves with the forces of good, helping the weak with self-control, unconditional faith, and total surrender. These things are very, very Christian, and all these concepts here, you could take it straight out of the Bible.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they purposely decided to interject that in that way.
Doesn't seem like it. It seems accidental.
Yeah, so it's just an interesting little side note to the research we were doing. But with that said, that's where we saw, or they saw Christianity, interjected into the Wakandan, belief system. But from there, I guess we can go to we were talking about how they destabilize, and we're going to talk about it. From the standpoint of what my experiences dealing with people who are in Thailand, who were hill tribe people, and how plants get interjected. Are we talking about that, or are we talking about?
That's part So if you'd like to give that example, then we can go into the fake example and we'll cut and
Okay. So in my real experience with the interjection of external, like a alternative religion into certain cultures and certain groups, was always something that's been, organized, just purposely organized. It was never about spreading the word of God. It was literally about weakening the belief systems of certain cultures who they wanted to invade. So a lot of these were indigenous cultures that would be considered a passive invasion. But even like in South America, there were, and there was actually some books that were written about the time when the Spanish were coming through with Catholicism, and how they were sending these missionaries into these, into the jungles to try to sway these particular cultures into becoming Christians. And one of the stories, I think they made a movie of called The Missionary or something like that, where the first scene is this grand waterfall, and then you see this cross come, this big cross come over the edge of the waterfall and comes down, and there's a guy tied to it, which is a missionary tied to it. And so those particular shamans were actually real shamans at that time, could read the alternative or the ulterior motives of this person who's supposed to be of the cloth and what he was there for. They could read and see the density around these particular individuals, and they would literally get rid of them. But one of the things that density decided to do was to actually put plants in these particular communities. And a lot of times it would happen when there was no shaman available. Either he or she died, or the person who belonged to the village is pregnant and they're on the road and they don't get back within the months in which the shaman generally would check to see who's coming into their community to tell you whether it's a yay or nay. Before it used to be all yays, but when density showed up, a lot of nays, because these guys knew about the swapping in consciousness into vehicles. Also, with the understanding again, those guys on that side, they consider this all a game. So again, they were interjecting a certain character into the hologram. So my real-time experience with that had to do with a community in Burma, where the person I was involved in at the time was supposed to be Christian. She had her little, medallion and so on. It's kind of interesting also because she spent a whole lot of time at the Buddhist temples as well. But what happened is that these guys and these particular communities would have some, what I call a plant, introduced into their culture, and usually into their group, someone that may relate to the chief of the village, the head of the village, someone who would end up having some clout. And when these guys became of age, then all of a sudden they decided to push their belief systems to the side and then accept Christianity. And one of the things I've noticed over and over again, because it's happened a lot in a lot of these different hill tribe groups, that there's something would happen to their quality of life afterwards. So one of the stories has to do with a river that was near this community that they would fish out of, and their fishing consisted of a raft with a battery and some electrical wires and shocking the water to get the fish, to stun the fish and collect them. But even with that process, they'd only get just so much fish. So I basically, I thought I was going to go fishing with a rod and all this stuff, and these guys had their own ideas about it. And so I just basically just observed, but in that time, I was picking up a lot of energy, a lot of information from a source that was in the area. It turned out it was the river, and talking about when the influx of this other foreign religion came in, those who were been there for centuries stopped communicating with her, stopped believing that she existed, and because of that, she started to withhold the bounty from the of the river. And it's really very, very clean water. It's like way up in the mountains. So these guys would just get only so many fish out of it. You know, they weren't thinking or respecting where they're getting it and so on and so forth. So I was asked, and I believe it's on YouTube or something.
I'll
the story.
provide the link as well.
But anyway, to make a long story short, I was to tell my friend that the river was literally saying that you guys aren't getting much from her because you've turned your backs on her. And I said, well, you're really going to have to show something, because if I just come and talk about it and I'm an outsider, they're just going to say, oh, okay, yeah, we're fine and dandy. So I said, you got to show something. And how she showed it was that these guys all of a sudden started catching all these fish, like really big fish, just more fish than they caught in, she said, Ezra, really. And it had to do with me telling them, look, the river wants you to recognize her and resume showing respect for nature in general, including herself. Mm-hmm. And there are pictures and everything of all this fish these guys caught, and everybody's super happy. And at least there are certain individuals who have sensitivity who actually totally said that they knew it was because I showed up that they got so much. They had such a successful bounty that time. So again, I guess it's still talking about religion, but also segueing it into.
Hello, Chief. I just want to say thank you. That was very interesting about the river.
Okay. Yeah, from Lucy, yes. Because you have questions about water coming up and also in the next forum. Yeah.
Okay, we can wait.
Thank you for
thank
your
you.
comment. So,
and I'll provide the link on both the website in FAQ section and also at the end of this Skype event. So the chief goes through the whole story in a very nice way. He illustrated everything, put music, and then he even has all these photos, so you can all check that out if you like to. So I'll go on. Well, Chief, there's a movie. I'm not sure if it's that movie you were talking about with the missionary, but in the church cult, they forced us to watch this movie about, in the church cult, they showed it as like, oh, a success. The missionaries got through to these people, in the jungle. And, whenever I saw it, I had this sickening feeling in my stomach, but I didn't understand it. And it was just as Chief said, they had someone who was born as like the daughter of the leader of the tribe, of the community, and they always use that word, but village of the community, and then they had these people begin to dream about Christianity. They would dream about it. So density was attacking them in their dreams, and then this person who was the daughter of the chieftain, she was very open to Christianity, and she was the reason that they started halting their killing of missionaries and brought in the church, and it was portrayed as a success in this movie. And just like as you said, it's a success because it is a destabilization of their culture.
Yeah, it's the beginning of the end of those cultures and their belief systems, and also just their healthy living, the way that they live off the land. Some of these groups would come in. Again, there's a reason why there are no really real shamans, And as far as like the difference between Neo Shamanism, and I'm going to just address it real quick, and shamanism, is that Neo Shamanism really isn't shamanism. It has to do with energy, generating energy from myself and in ourselves, and reconnecting to the energy source, which is spring consciousness. And when you come to talk about just shamanism, usually what comes to mind with most people, drums and beads, and slamming on the drum. Some go as far as like, chicken blood, and all these different fetishes and so on and so forth. Neo Shamanism has none of that stuff. So you have everything. My belief is that you have everything you need within your own energy to keep yourself balanced. Or also, once you get rid of the noise of this realm, you also have the ability to connect really to really useful sources beyond, this realm. And you don't really need a someone who's a minister or someone who's claiming to be some shaman to actually connect you to what's out there in the other realm. Initially, as a consciousness, that is your right to actually be able to communicate and access. So when we're talking about this movie and we're talking about just things in this realm, of course you're not going to know this stuff. Of course they're going to send you to this person, that person, and so on and so forth. And we talk about the introduction of fake shamans and healers and so on and so forth into the ranks. There are individuals who do certain things, but even then, their scope is still earthbound. The scope of Neo Shamanism is universal, which talks about we are just literally in one little dot in a vast universe full of consciousness. And it's about reconnecting to that, and none of this, this distractive stuff. What do they call it? Something council of whatever, of these aliens who are supposed to, some of you might have read some of the stuff or heard about it, that are supposed to be the Galactic Council or something like that. And these Palladians and so on, who are supposed to help you get, but we can't get in there and do it for you. We just walk around and tell you that, boy, you're really screwing up the planet. Boy, don't you feel bad? Maybe you ought to stop screwing up the planet. But they're talking to a tourist or a guy who's plowing his field instead of the source who are actually dumping trash and oil and garbage into the bloodstream of Gaia. So again, but anyway, let's pull back and we just get back on track with the.
I was feeling whenever you speak, there's like this energy that just emanates from you, and it's very pleasant. And thank you. So I'm gonna go forward. So when Chief was talking about plants are usually people who have density in them intensely and born near the leader. So, for example, the brother of the king, the old king, the Black Panther's dad, he was the first plant that the movie talks about because he let Claw into Wakanda. Claw blew up part of the border, which killed a bunch of people. He also helped Claw to steal vibranium. He also tried to kill the priest of Wakanda, the guy who was organizing the ritual and who knew many of the secrets, the ritual combat. And so all these things, they already beginning the destabilization of Wakanda.
Well, I think also the kind of a mind screw has to do with Black Panther feeling that his father was the one who wrong, who was in the wrong. Again, it wasn't very clear as to why they didn't take the kid with them. But he was dumping on his father as being the bad guy for literally killing his own brother, who was about to kill someone who was not a threat because he was being exposed by this person. So it was to me it was very formula in that regards, like formula Hollywood, where all of a sudden somebody's he's like totally over the top emotional. And again, they talk about him being a shaman, but only in freaking name, because there was nothing shamanic about the guy except that he had this this ritual that they put him through to gain the power of the Black Panther. So again, I felt like he wasn't very prepared to be a wise leader. He was a little too emotional, I felt. The character, that is. Anyway.
Yeah, because when Killmonger was like, and I'll put them in the dirt next to your sister, anything about family, or, like your mama, your sister, he's like, ah. I'm like, that's not very shamanic.
Yeah, just, easily thrown off his, off of his center. But that seems to be the case with a lot of movies, just outside of even Black Panther, where they're showing someone who's the protagonist as being kind of not that balanced, and sometimes not that bright either. But him, it wasn't like he was showing him to not be bright. He was just emotional to the point where he lost his temper, and then they start fighting again after Killmonger talks about his sister. Don't talk about my family.
Easily triggered.
Yeah, well, he was. His character was way too easily triggered for someone who's supposed to be, part of, running or leading a culture, or a group. But again, you could say, well, he wasn't really ready. His father was killed prematurely. But in essence, they show these movies where they're always preparing, and in reality, density is always preparing their little ones to take over whatever the corporations or whatever scheme that density has going on in this planet from the time that they're really little. So what I felt, and I was a little disappointed in the fact that he was so easily affected.
In the movie, they allude to why they didn't bring the phone.
Okay. Well, you can just, because that part I didn't really get clearly, but you said they did address that, though.
Well, you can tell me if I'm wrong, of course, because in the movie they allude to that whenever Killmonger goes to that ancestral plane, he talks to his father unit inside of that plane, and he says, he says, I really want you to be able to see Wakanda, but I don't think that they'll accept you. Mm-hmm. And he says, why? He says, they will say you're lost. And whenever you were talking about those who went out of Wakanda and stayed in the rest of the world, they changed. They assimilated to the programming that was out there. So whenever they say he's already lost, that might be why they didn't take him back.
So the father is alluding to the idea that the kid was already contaminated.
Yes. Yeah.
And I do recall he was saying something that he wished he had taken him earlier. And I guess that would say that before you got old enough to be influenced by by the outer world. So okay, I accept that as something of an excuse for not bringing the kid. But again, to me, I kind of, I thought maybe a little bit more explanation, was in line, so that you really kind of get a gist of what they were talking about as to why, the father didn't bring this kid back, because he said something that it was Rwanda first or something like that when Black Panther asked his father again when he saw him in the ancestral plane, why he didn't bring Killmonger back with him to Rwanda. Yeah. And again, there's some interesting things that the Killmonger introduced that had to do with Greek mythology and politics of Rome and Greece. Even some of the stuff having to do with Japan and the shogunate, where when the new shogunate would come in, he would kill all of the living relatives of the previous shogunate. And what I read about, Greece and Rome, when the new emperor would come in, they would literally kill the whole family line. And Killmonger was actually talking about something to that effect, killing the whole family line of, did he say killing the whole family line?
Anyone loyal, that could
anyone
be the
loyal.
Whole country.
Yeah, well, yeah, he was talking about this basically, wiping out more than half the country. Because he did end up with these really, delusional people following him. And if I were saying it was real, I would say, wow, these guys got corkscrewed big time. They don't even know this guy. He comes in and he talks some stuff, and then and then this whole also had to do with the regimen of rules that he has the royal blood, therefore we got to give him a shot, instead of this guy smells funny. when we don't know him. And also, the actor, he does do these roles where he can put off the arrogance really, really, really well. And that was projecting also when I remember first seeing the movie. And the last thing, a logical person would do would to believe a person like him. And they put Black Panther in kind of a tight spot when Killmonger challenged him, for the to be the chief, or what they call king, challenged him. And it was interesting to say, well, it's kind of a tight spot. If he were to say no, forget it, throw him in the dungeons, or or kill him, or whatever, then they would say, well, maybe you're afraid of this guy. So then he has to well, I'm not afraid of this guy, so I have to prove that I'm not afraid of this guy and that I am, strong, and so on and so forth. So it was kind of clever. I thought it was interesting that they, how they did that, and it was, I thought it was, it was a clever piece. So anyway, he ends up having to battle this guy who's been, spending I don't know how many years killing people just to prepare for the day that he's going to kill, the king of Rwanda, or kill, Black Panther. And I believe he did say that he'd been preparing all of his life just for that moment to come in and savagely, take down these people who took everything away from him, who I guess was the father, was everything, or, it's everything to him. So anyway, I thought that was interesting.
Thank you. So the next thing that goes right along the line. So Chief is talking about Killmonger, and he would be considered a very, very militant and aggressive plant, of density into that community to destabilize Wakanda. But there's also something that is called a passive, like what Chief calls a passive plant. So someone like Nakia, she went out into...
Yeah, she was the love interest.
Yeah, the love interest of Black Panther. She's again close to the leader and has a role where she could influence the direction of Wakanda and destabilize the country. So she goes the other route. So it shows her fighting Killmonger, and everyone's like, ooh, she's a great girl, But what does she do? She gets Wakanda to open up, which is enough. And then, just like Wakabi says, if you bring in those people, you're going to bring in their problems as well. You're going to dilute the culture of Wakanda.
Yeah, and if it was very realistic, they would study the situation out there, and obviously Wakanda is just a certain size of as a country in comparison to the rest of the world, the globe, and they're talking about opening up and giving this very, very advanced technology to a bunch of people who have been known to just cause problems. So it didn't really, that part, it just didn't set well with me. I just thought it was, ridiculous, kind of pie in the sky, almost Disney-esque, because you just glance over the thing that will solve this is this one thing, new technology. Actually, to tell you the truth, Killmonger was more logical in a sense, even though his thing was about becoming a dictator or a fascist, than what they decided to do in the end. Because again, of course, it's fancy. It's this realm. It doesn't deal with the idea that individuals come in very, very dense, and no matter what you do, some of these folks, or a lot of them, are just going to stay dense, and they're going to run again being programmed. So we introduce all this stuff, and all they're doing is actually adding to the problem. Now all these guys got super duper weapons to cause more, even more trouble. And the ones who decide that they can gather the most, or even do more technological experiments, which happens in this world anyway. Governments support scientists in this, on this planet. And some will say, oh, well, the scientists are just for our own good. No, it has a nefarious agenda as well. Some of the things that people feel they benefit from are byproducts of experiments that they're doing, having to do with increasing the control of the density on the planet, and controlling the food better, because there's a lot of times the food gets out of hand. That's why there's all these commercials and things and these institutions to keep everyone stuck and focused on just one thing and not seeing the whole picture, not seeing or even thinking in terms realistically, like every day you should be aware that you are in the universe and not just on Gaia or not just on Earth. So, with all that said, yeah, it's hard to really, again, it's fantasy, its purpose is primarily entertainment, which I thought was good entertainment, good looking. I got the feeling that, when individuals are seeing themselves presented in a way where it's not like, inner city, ghetto issues, drive-by killings and all these films that were coming out during the 80s and 90s, having to do with, a certain community, on the planet, and primarily in America. So.
Yes, Chief, along the lines of technology and viewing that, technology and aid will help people. You referenced a book, Chief, called The Confessions of an Economic Hitman by John Perkins, and how aid and, this trade with other countries, when in that realm, countries that the people that aren't players, they look down on other countries, and they do that in the last scene of Black Panther, where there's a gentleman who says, what does a farming country have to offer, the world? As they're already on a lower status, and they would be new to the game, so they wouldn't be respected by the other older business.
Yeah, it's again, it's as far as entertainment, cool. But read between the lines. Every movie. That's why I put this together. The movie review is to basically inspire you to look and read between the lines. And it doesn't actually, if anything, it makes the movie more interesting to me than I'm interfering with a flow of the story. Because the flow of the story is literally leading you by the nose down a certain hallway and telling you don't look left and don't look right. So what Ms. A was talking about with the Confessions of an Economic Hitman, he literally talks. This is a guy who was in in that game of destabilizing countries. And he was the first. Be the first. They used to use, like I said before, missionaries to interject religion as a way to destabilize various cultures around the planet. This one, they would come in with a suitcase full of money and offer to do certain things like putting some roads or whatever in what they consider to be poor countries. But there's always a hitch. In other words, that money is a loan with a lot of interest involved. So they would get these, if the leader of that particular country would play ball with them, they would find themselves in deep debt that they would not be able to pay off. And so what the guy had written also, that if his tack didn't work, then they would send in someone to literally assassinate that leader and then put someone else in his place. And there's examples like that, throughout the late 1900s, where there are certain individuals, they call them some tin pot dictators, but 9 times out of 10, they were supported by, larger countries like America, England, France, Germany, you name, those particular, in other words, the West, literally. And they were there so that these guys could literally come in and do whatever they wanted to do. If they wanted to take out the resources, they can come in and take out the resources. When I was in Tibet, the same thing was going on with China, annexing Tibet and coming in and just basically taking out as much of whatever resources they were finding. And when I was visiting there was just be these lines and lines and lines of these tanker trucks loaded up with I don't know what. Even my tour guide didn't know what was in this stuff. He just talked about the greed from the Chinese greed. So this goes across a lot of different countries that are considered to be powerhouses on the planet. So with that being reality, in my mind, let's open our doors and share our stuff. I'm like, I don't think so, man. How do you know? You don't know what will transpire by offering and giving things to the outside world. Also, I thought it was kind of interestingly weird that the agent from England, the white guy who had the broken back, that they were just openly just talking about the stuff that they were doing, literally what I consider to be secrets, because no one outside knew what was going on. But this guy, they don't even know. They're walking around and the sisters telling him how this is made, how to do this, and so on and so forth. And it reminded me when I was a kid, and my mom said, never talk too much. Just observe. And and I think you had something from the Father unit that had something to do with if you listen more than speak, you'll learn more about what's going on.
Yeah, he said you'll know more about everyone else, and they'll know nothing about you.
Yeah. So I thought that was kind of odd. Also, and I would maybe blame the producers for introducing this guy, and who couldn't be more of a foreigner. And also a part of a government, organization where he came from, that this woman who doesn't even know this guy would trust him, with his kind little face or whatever, to, not spill the beans or organize something where they would get invaded later. So that didn't make sense to me either. We were talking about destabilization. Yeah, there's a lot of, so you may think that, well, they're on this destabilization thing, but that was the crux of basically the story, really, when it came to whether they should open their doors or not. They're opening their doors to destabilization. But you can, go ahead and share the story.
When I graduated from university with a degree in international business management, and during one of those classes, they talked about how aid to foreign countries is such a farce, and actually is about destabilization of that country. For example, they would dump, I use the word dump, but in whenever they market this aid, they praise themselves and they say what a great job they did for these foreign countries. But really, for example, they give this said country a ton of clothes, free clothes. Yeah, that's so cool. But what it does is it really puts a large sector of maybe of those who work with textiles out of business. They don't have a job anymore. They can't support themselves. So they've literally destabilized that whole entire sector, and now they have to look for new jobs, which can crowd other parts of the occupations of the other people in that country. So now the country has more problems than they had before, and on top of that, now they might owe the country who said they gave them aid. And that's another way that density just keeps things in chaos in this world.
Yeah, literally governments are like gangsters, really, the way that they do business. There's nothing altruistic about anything that they're doing. And if a person is not really doing any kind of work or thinking, they'll believe that, they came and they gave aid to this, to this country, that country, and so on and so forth. Also, there's no sense of history as to what was saying. They come in, destabilize, people get out of work, all of a sudden, then poverty. Now, these cultures, I'm hard pressed, even after the Yin approach, hard pressed to believe that these cultures were basically all impoverished from the beginning. It has to do with the introduction of other concepts and ideas that were designed primarily to weaken and destabilize cultures because the West was very much interested in land. So there are some really derogatory sayings having to do with, oh man, his name is slipping my mind, who talked about being in Africa, the hell with with the people of this country, give me land. So again, I would have liked, but again, if I wanted to see that in that movie, well, you gotta, get your own budget together and make your own damn movie. Yeah, and I would say, yeah, you're right. I can just basically talk about the holes in it and the fact that it is very Disney-like in this, in how it ends and how he's talking about, I'm being good by being naive. So if you're going to introduce something, still with that, it's still just, there's so much density that you put anything out there, somebody's going to take it and use it in a way that is not intended by someone who's altruistic. That's all there is to it. They're not talking about that you're going out there and you're dealing with a lot of people who are just jacked up and damaged. So, they talk about these, and we even showed it with certain, we talk about individuals coming back from the outside and then talking about opening up the doors like they've been corkscrewed or something.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. As you were talking about, then after that, is lambast the right word?
Lambasting?
Then they villainize these countries that are poor. They're full of crime. They're poor. They're this. They're that. But they are a part of the system destabilizing that country to where they are in that state of poverty and in that state of destitute.
Yeah, and one of the things, again, they're trying to sell the concept that there's altruism in this world, like there is the balance yin and yang side. There is no balance. There's always been more yin after this density showed up than yang. Yeah, and there were never going to be more yang than yin. It was always going to be something that was going to support the sickness and the imbalance of those who literally ran things, and they're still, I could say, running things up to a certain point on this planet. Again.
Is it okay to do something correctly? Not taking
Well, again, everything's connected, but you can just go ahead and give it a shot. I'll let you go.
Yeah, you can let me know if I'm wrong. Okay, thank you very much.
Right.
So, like Chief talks about, beyond the walls, beyond the program, taking things farther, like Chief says, shamanism is about this realm, this world, but Neo Shamanism and the way that Chief teaches it is beyond, is universal. And so we're taking this whole concept. So if density is into destabilizing communities with any semblance of balance, this is also an approach that they do to consciousness, to yourselves, and to myself.
Mm-hmm.
For example, it's called fragmentation. That Chief always calls it fragmentation. And it's whenever, so that community that has been weakened by these methods of destabilization that we already explained is now there are methods of destabilizing a consciousness. Lifetime after lifetime, expression after expression of experiencing density will fragment a consciousness. And then that consciousness is suffering. So that, like, that community is now destabilized and in poverty, that consciousness is now wrecked and filled with programming. And then they're accused, like, for example, oh, you were molested, that's your fault. Oh, your whole right side of your body is paralyzed, that's your fault. Oh, you're a poor community, that's your fault. And that's how density behaves to a fragment as they have destabilized the consciousness. And then they just continue destabilizing it more and more and more. And that's what they've done to the consciousness of everything.
Yeah, just basically on. And again, I believe in energy. I don't believe in the concept of disease. But if you want to talk about a disease, that's literally what density behaves like. It behaves like what it calls a virus. It comes in and it consumes and consumes and consumes until there's nothing left. So if anyone thinks that, you're going to get something balanced out of the deal of these guys coming in, or this type of system running things. If you look at how humans deal with lab rats and so on, they're expendable. And the system that has been in place for a very, very long time sees everyone here as expendable. So they do whatever, and then they keep, feeding all of this nonsense into people's head, thinking that there is some altruism when they have not really experienced it. So, you have some laughs or whatever, but again, as I've said before, the stress always outweighs the times of where you really feel chill and you're enjoying yourself. And even some will go to the, poisons or whatever to try to escape this, to feel better. So in other words, some of these avenues are very, very dangerous and very, to the physical vehicle. And they're introduced also as a way to weaken the consciousness and weaken the fortitude of your avatar and so on and so forth, so that they can do what they want to do. So, there's an agenda that they're telling you is going on here that everyone should aspire to and be aware of, but they have a totally different agenda going on the other side that has to do with what they want, and that everyone here is just big players in their game. But I don't know if that was the alarm went off for the end.
There's 8 minutes left.
Okay.
But shall I continue?
Yeah, you can go ahead.
So, for example, Chief talked about destabilizing a community by getting them to believe in an external item, like the crystal, or something that can be taken away, or believing in an external entity like a deity or something like that. And you think, okay, you see how it can destabilize a community, but it destabilizes consciousness as well. They believe in a deity external to themselves. They believe in fetishes external to themselves, and they become destabilized. They become imbalanced, and eventually they're broken down until they're black loose.
Yeah, and again, everything comes from someone's or something's idea. So even when they're talking about religion, they act as though it's like, with the story that all of a sudden it just, sprung up, and there's this one deity that says that I'm the only one, and there's another deity that says I'm the only one, and so on and so forth. But in reality, if you see yourself as part of the universe, as a viable consciousness in the universe, you could very well, if you're not damaged, been one of those who decided, I think being a Christian is a good idea, or Muslim is a good idea, or Buddhist is a good idea, and so on and so on, and so on. All of those things come from some source. So if you don't know what that source is, or who that source is, who actually thought of this and decided to put it into play, you really don't really know if you are considered to be religious, you don't really know what you're worshiping. You're taking the word of something or someone that you don't know also, and if you keep your eyes open, so many of these particular situations, even just these institutions in general, are always undermining people. There's always complaints about them. Even when it comes to the medical association, and I've had my experience with them, where if they don't know certain things, oh man, how fast they are to pull something out of their butt, just to save face and start experimenting on you. Again, not to just depress anyone, because I have, in other words, I don't like stories that just bring me down and tell you what's really, really, really bad. But the only reason I talk about this is because I have found that the way that I'm dealing with things and what I'm teaching actually helps a person stand more solid in their own, in their own being within this turmoil. And as those of you who know, you get outsiders always trying to tell you there's something wrong with what you're believing, when you know that your life is getting better. Because they're all, contaminated. They're all tapped in, like, to the Smiths. And it's just amazing. Sometimes they're just ferociously opposed to, Neo Shamanism, and the fact that you're actually changing, which means that you're moving out of their reach. And the reach means it's like a table where you're close enough where they just reach and just feed on you. Now you're moving too far away, and they have to make an effort to try to get there and feed on you. And they keep moving, and it makes it just even harder for them, and then they just lose their minds. And it seems very illogical that, wow, why are they acting so weird? They're acting so weird because you don't know what goes on the other side. Has to do with feeding. So if you have a certain relative, all of a sudden you're getting into Neo Shamanism, you're getting into having sessions, you're feeling really better, you're feeling more solid, things are going better for you. Teach you how to read how the waves of intent flow, so that you can read the energy of a person instead of listening to what they're saying or just looking at their face. You can listen to what they're saying, but you're also paying attention on another level that you're not trained to pay attention to, because density can't feed if you're aware of the game that they're playing. So anyway, with that said, I don't know if I got way off with that, but it definitely coincides with with what we're talking about with the movie. But again, as far as entertainment, yeah, cool. But be aware of the programming that's still sustained. It seems like it's a movie about Black folks, but it's also a movie that still has all the signatures of yin and yang and density, like all the other Hollywood movies and all these other movies that are released. You're going to always find something that supports their mindset and what they want you, where they want you to be, and how they want you to think.
You also, Chief, said to watch out for mantras, because density loves to recycle mantras. Keep you safe. Watch how many times you can find that in every type of media.
Yeah, especially after like the mid to late 90s, when Baby Bush, when he was in, all of a sudden I was hearing these, TV shows, and and he was doing these speeches where just doing this to make you safe. We're invading some place in the middle of the desert that doesn't have a way to actually get to us, except they send these operatives over the, through, the airplanes and so on and so forth. They don't have ships that they can sail to your borders and, blast the hell out of your major cities. But, they tell you, like, this is to keep you safe. And that's the key word, fear of not being safe. So it's a mantra that they were basically started, again, well over 20 years ago. And it's funny to still hear it in movies. It's like they pick up certain catchphrases and they figure it works well enough, then they just keep using it.
Why
Yeah, well, if they're getting enough response from it, an essence from it, they're not going to change it up. And again, because they expect to not have to, because they expect everyone on this planet to be brainwashed. That's what the educational systems are about, and all these other institutions are about. So basically to limit you, and I've said this before, so to limit your perspective of even your own existence. Even things that are going on that you're having a hard time explaining, but then you come to me, that's, oh yeah, I know what that is. The number of people who've used alternative as the last ditch effort to survive because they're afraid of transitioning, because they really don't know if there's a heaven or a hell out there. So they're just, they're scared crapless. A lot of these folks have been wrapped up in religion, but for some reason, whatever their deity isn't doing it for them. And they're not accepting that, well, maybe the deity wants you to go. They say, oh, I don't know. I think I'm just going to, walk over here for a bit and say, well, I no longer belong to this religion, but in reality, they haven't really let go of it. And it's just it doesn't really doesn't jive, it doesn't make logical sense. Either you totally believe in what you're supposed to be, your faith, or you don't. So anyway, with that said, we have
just a few seconds.
Okay.
If you want to ask anything.
Yeah, anyone have anything to add, or it will go a little longer if you have any questions or anything to add to your perspective on the movie, what we talked about. Okay.
Hi, Chief. It's Neo Shamanic.
Hello.
I went back and I watched the movie, and I even tried to see it from the Neo Shamanic perspective. But the way you guys tied in, I'm noticing that with each movie review, it gets better and better and better. So I just want to say that I genuinely enjoy these movie reviews because it's so dope.
Well, thank you. And I apologize again for taking such a long time to get in here.
No, it was perfect, Chief.
But great, I'm glad. Thank you for sharing that. Really,
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
This movie has a lot of touchy subjects, a lot of people's emotions involved, and it made them feel good. You know, sometimes if anything makes them feel good, it's hard for them to look at it logically or practically, or in a more balanced way.
Yeah. But I guess with that, no one has any other questions, or you had something else?
Just one more thing. So there's other, like when Chief was talking about phrases, that density, like mantras that they like to throw around. Lastly, at the very, very end of Black Panther, it says, more connects us than separates us. If you have questions about what that means or what density intends, their intent with those sorts of mantras, feel free to watch movies and write down the mantras that they repeat over and over, and then share them on the forum or send them in, and then Chief can explain really what they mean.
Yeah, we can decipher it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's good to actually not just sit and just look at it as entertainment. It is programming. So every movie that you watch, there's programming in it. But if you're aware, it's like the subliminal messages. If you see a sign that has a subliminal message, or sex in bubbles in a Coke ad or something like that, and someone points it out to you, the next time you see that, you're going to go straight to the subliminal message, which means that it's been neutralized. And also, you start, as I did, I started looking years and years ago at for subliminal messages in everything that I was observing in this world.
And those questions are good for, like, if you like to submit them for the all muscle testing form for the global, because if it's like a mantra that you see in a movie, then she can muscle test the meaning or what density intends. But thank you.
Okay. Well, yeah, thanks everyone for joining again with the AsktheChief West Coast edition, the 12th AsktheChief.
12th AsktheChief.
Yeah, West Coast edition.
Thanks.
And you all have a good day, a good evening, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Welcome.